the Necrons and the Satan. Two vastly different Xenos races, yet they share a complicated history spanning millions of years. One of them, a compassionless race of warriors constructed entirely of living metal. The other, shards of their former godlike existence. If we wish to understand them better, we have to look at how the events in the galaxy has shaped them, from their original forms to who they are now. Some of this will be my own speculation and feelings towards the subject, so I hope you all enjoy. Betrayal. A feeling that encompasses the Necron or Necrontyr's life story. But to get to the root of why treachery has affected this race so much, we have to start at the beginning. Thought to have been millions of years before the events of the 40k timeline. Even at the start, the Necrontyr's existence was grueling, as their mortal bodies were battered by intense radiation. The daily life of the Necrontyr is constant discomfort and pain. Wrecked by permanent sickness, their lifespans are pitifully low, and all would suffer constant loss. Often their bodies became blighted with terrible cancers and other illnesses linked to the high levels of radiation given off by their sun. Through thousands of years, they reached something which could be called a society shaped by a life lived in anticipation of their early demise, in veneration of their dead, resting in vast sepulchres and tombs. Unsure, the Necrontyr began to realize that they could not change their fate, doomed to be trapped in frail bodies. With nothing to hope for, the great houses engaged in all-out conflicts known as the Succession. Knowing that genetic salvation was not possible, they would war amongst themselves for the scraps of comfort and power. Ultimately, the Triarch, the ruling council of the Necrontyr Empire, realized that the only hope of the unity of old lay in conflict with an external enemy. Many millions of years before mankind, something coalesced from the vast energies first unleashed by the very birth of the galaxy itself. As titanic energies were thrown across the vast emptiness of space, amongst the birth of the very early seas of stars, something new begun to form into an existence of a lonely universe. Whereas before there was nothing more than hydrogen gas and atomic dust, ruled over by the gravitic force of billions of new stars. Perhaps long before the first planets and structures had coalesced and cooled. Possibly the very first truly conscious beings emerged. Their thoughts encased within the lines of force produced by the plasma and solar energies of newborn suns. These entities are not likely how humans would have defined life. Because despite lacking a truly physical body, they were conscious and possessed complex thoughts and communications between themselves. In later times, these entities would become known as the Satan, the cruel star gods. But early in their existence, they were neither malevolent or benevolent, just hungry. Through the passage of time, I imagine these beings would begin to drift through the galaxy, consuming solar energies of the very stars that had brought them into existence, shortening the lifespans of suns by millions of standard years. In time, these star devourers learned to move on the channels of the universe's electromagnetic flux, leaving their origins to drift further throughout the cosmic to new feeding grounds and begin their cycle of draining and consuming. Being constructed of entirely pure energy, they likely paid no mind to the solid matter they passed in the vacuum of space, finding that although they could be sustained by the energies of planets or smaller objects, but would ignore these smaller pieces to feast upon the richness only a sun could provide. Time seems almost pointless to keep track of for these immortal devourers, but innumerable years would pass in the galaxy. Parallel to this, complex life had begun elsewhere. Life not of pure energy, but of physical matter. It is unknown the true point in the timeline, but eventually a different xenos species came to prominence. The Old Ones. A species enveloped in the powers of the warp, possessing similarly immortal lifetimes, but unlike these etheric devourers, the Old Ones were of flesh and bone. It is unclear which of these two competing races truly begun first, but both clearly had origins dating back to the early universe. Long before the birth of the Necrontyr, these Old Ones began to spread out and conquer the stars through their mastery of psychic powers, seeding and nurturing similar but different complex life on countless numbers of planets and systems, constructing incredible feats of engineering, biology, and warp-based constructs, even creating the Webway, a tunnel system within the warp to allow almost instant travel throughout the galaxy. Unlike the Star Devourers, these Old Ones held to the belief that all life was precious, and it should be preserved. Likely lost to the annals of history, we know that the ancient Devourers and the Old Ones crossed paths, likely long before the birth of the other sentient races. Being a race steeped heavily in psychic abilities, it's possible that the Old Ones did not possess the means to communicate with the Devourers. Or possibly what they had tried did not foster any understanding or comprehension between the two races. A major weakness of the Devourers is their inability to comprehend the warp, and with a warp-based race, this may have meant that communication was futile. It is likely that the Old Ones viewed the Satan as etheric cosmic parasites rather than actual physical life, or likely not meeting their standards for it. It is clear that the Devourers did not have any perception that was remotely similar to the Old Ones, and would not have even understood the concept of the value of life. I believe that to protect the galaxy and the other forms of life that the Old Ones had sown, that they had chosen to destroy the Devourers that they came across. Many of them were ruthlessly attacked, and would have likely drifted to the more remote regions of the galaxy for some form of safety. As the innumerable years would continue to pass, the Devourers would continue their drift across space, likely avoiding this galactic empire of the Old Ones. However, as one of the Devourers, later called Azgorod, drifted, it found its next target, a highly radiated sun in the Halo Stars region. A small planet orbited this star and was home to a weak and radiated race, the homeworld of the Necrontyr. The Necron triarchy had united all of the dynasties, and under the premise of pillaging the Old Ones for their knowledge of fabled immortality. This tantalizing offer sent reverberations throughout the Necrontyr, and with hope reignited, how could they lose? However, despite their superior scientific technology, they were consistently outmaneuvered by the Old Ones. Thanks to their mastery of webway portals and warp gates, the retaliation of the Old Ones was swift. Despite being united under their one true leader, the Silent King, and having numbers on their side, they were no match for the psychic prowess of the Old Ones. The Necrontyr fell by the countless to the relentless assaults by the Old Ones. Any sense of pride or superiority must have been destroyed. The Necrontyr dynasties began to lose planets and systems at an alarming rate, some even begging the current Silent King and the Triarch to seek peace. But possibly unable to stomach the idea of giving up and further dividing their people, they continued this futile war. Eventually, after many years of defeats, the Necrontyr were pushed back to their homeworld, a shell of their former glory, and imprisoned on a radiated planet, left to be forgotten. The war was essentially lost, and now the Necrontyr's long millennia of imprisonment on their homeworld was beginning. Every Necrontyr now born must have been acutely aware of this overarching hopelessness that their life had become. We have seen that through the numberless generations of work that they had reached out to the stars and escaped the living hell that was their homeworld. They had built structures the sizes of moons and created ingenious advancements in technology. They had even went to war with gods to take from them the secrets of eternal life. But now they are a shadow of their former glory, and were more divided than ever. They come across as an extremely prideful people, and I believe this was a big reason for their downfall. Even their new Silent King, Cesarek, must have been completely enveloped in these feelings of shame and hatred towards their situation. Living on an irradiated and overcrowded planet, Cesarek seems powerless and must have been unsure of any direction to help guide his people. But during the reign of Cesarek, new events in their solar system began to distract the Triarch Council. We are unsure of any exact date, but through the continued desperate efforts of the Necrontyr, studying their irradiated sun, something unusual was discovered. The energies of their sun were draining away, or more likely being absorbed by something. To their immense surprise, the Necrontyr discovered something they described as the raw energy of stars made animate. Finding such a truly incomprehensible Xenos, they sought to understand this stranger, or even communicate with it. Through the ingenuity of the Necrontyr's technology, they found a way, and likely for the first time in existence, this star vampire perceived something other than its own brethren. To the star devourers, they must have had no concept of language or any conventional communication, but the Necrontyr had found a way. Despite the odds, the Necrontyr had caught this being's attention, and now the attention of the other devourers as well. Understanding that to perceive the material universe, they must have needed a way to manifest in a material form. Likely in awe of these devourers' power, Some Necrontyr oversaw the forging of physical shells for it to occupy, cast from the living metal called necrodermis that they had once used for their colony torch ships. Maybe with this they could find out how or why this being was devouring their radiated sun. Translucent streams of electromagnetic force shifted across space as the star vampires coiled into their new bodies, with the physical realm screaming with fire and power. Witnessing this physical apotheosis, the Necrontyr must have been in awe, as these beings of twisted energy and metal began to perceive the physical universe for the first time. The focused tendrils of electromagnetic energy given off by the physical bodies of the Necrontyr had secretly awakened a new hunger in the Devourers, very unlike the one they had sated by nourishing themselves with the energies of stars. But finally, before Cesarek and the Necrontyr, they spoke with the star vampires, telling them the story of the Necrontyr people. It must have been almost overwhelming to the Devourers, but I believe that they quickly adapted to the new sensations and plane of thought. As if by design, the physical forms of these star devourers began to coalesce into more stable and silhouetted forms, suspiciously similar to the depictions of the Necrontyr's pantheons of gods. With such unbelievable events that had happened, the Necrontyr gave a name they felt befitting of these new, powerful guests: the Satan, the star gods. So it was that one of the Satan came before the silent king Cesarek, one going by the name of Mephethran. Unfortunately, the silent king was naive to the Satan's true nature and their motivations. Mephethran spoke of war, fought long before the birth of the Necrontyr, between the Satan and the Old Ones. It was more of a slaughter to the Satan, about how they were hunted, not through fear, as at the time they had no concept, but rather through survival. They had fled and hid into the depth of space. Cesarek, having inherited a civilization almost destroyed by the Old Ones, must have felt keenly this injustice. Mephethran whispered to Cesarek of the hope that Satan would one day find allies with whom they could finally bring the Old Ones to justice. In return for this aid, Mephethran assured he and his brothers would deliver everything the Necrontyr desired. A united people like the Empire of old, immortality that they had fought so long to free them from their constant pain. Mephethran insisted that what they could offer would be bestowed upon these valuable allies. It was as if every word was crafted for Cesarek, who, like the silent kings before him, despaired at the divisions that were tearing apart his people. For many months he debated the matter with the other two pharaohs of the the Triarch Council alongside his nobles at his royal court. The current Necrontyr were constantly reminded of what they were a shadow of, especially their former glories. Whether true or not, they believed that they were so close to finally achieving dominion over the galaxy and curing their irradiated bodies, but it was the Old Ones that had denied them. Having the appearance of the godlike Satan in their hour of need almost seems like a sign. Despite some voicing their concerns, the Necrontyr and ultimately Cesarek were desperate, and through a mix of revenge and hope, Cesarek accepted the deal. The Necrontyr's diseased flesh would be replaced with living metal of necrodermis that had made up the Star God's own physical forms. Their organic bodies would be fixed, and in their new forms they would be free to join the Satan in the pursuit of great vengeance against the Old Ones. They would be free from the sensation of pain. The Star Gods revealed that the form of immortality that the Necron would take would be these suits of magnificent armor. It must have looked enticing. The time was now, and Cesarek sent out his orders to gather all of the billions of Necrontyr to begin the process. Colossal biofurnaces built by the Necrontyr roared day and night. Into these the Necrontyr marched. Even the dissident dynasties and the unwilling were forced in for their own good. As the likely terrified Necrontyr people entered the biofurnaces, each of them was stripped of their flesh and soul, their body replaced by a shell of living metal, animated by an imprint of their former selves. Above each furnace, the etheric true forms of the Satan gorged themselves on the life energy and emotions of an entire species. It was only when Cesarek himself emerged from the biotransference process and looked upon what had become of his people that he had seen the awful truth of the pact he had made. Cesarek had emerged in a gleaming and powerful metallic body. He felt better than he had in his entire life. The countless aches and uncertainties of organic life were now behind him. His new machine body was far stronger. His mind was free from constant pain. But something was missing. He felt hollow, like he had lost something deep within. As he looked up, Cesarek watched the Satan feast on the life essence of his people. The reality of this dark pact was setting in, and he must have now realized his mistake. Looking around, he sees his people reborn in durable, living metal bodies, but they were still silent. Any aspect of personality or independent thought gone. Only a minority of the previous Necrontyr's ruling dynasties retained any resemblance of their former selves. Their minds linked in complete, unwavering service under the silent King Cesarek. The true nature of the Satan was revealed, cruel and vindictive. They had existed only to consume, and now had shown that they enjoyed pain and suffering of sentient life. Fueled by the Necrontyr, the Satan had become incredibly powerful, and Cesarek was left no choice but to follow them. The Necrontyr were dead, and in their place was the Necrons, an army for the C'tan to destroy the Old Ones and consume the galaxy. The Necrons were going to war, whether they liked it or not. The enslaved Necrons, with their C'tan masters, loosened the moorings of war and set out to destroy the Old Ones. Drunk on the power of the Necrons' life force, the C'tan were unstoppable, and in their own way had really become star gods. Planets were razed, suns devoured, and whole star systems were destroyed by armies of billions. The Old Ones likely could not believe what they had unleashed. It was a war of malice and revenge, and despite Cesarek's despair in his situation, he and his race were all too happy to destroy the Old Ones as well. Even though the Necrons were, in a way, given what they wanted, this revenge must have felt ultimately hollow. In fact, those of the ruling dynasties might not have felt anything at all. Eventually, even the Old Ones, who had once been defined by their patience and unstoppable will, became desperate in the face of the Necron assault. They needed an army, and they used their accumulated knowledge to genetically engineer intelligent beings with strong psychic links to the warp, hoping to create servants with the capabilities of channeling psychic power to defend themselves. They nurtured many potential warrior races. Among them are believed to be the earliest members of the Eldari species, and many other Xenos races, including the Rashan, the Jokero, the Knib, the Krork, and many others. Millennia has passed, and as the Old Ones' creations finally bore fruit, whilst the C'tans and their Necron servants continue to extinguish life across the galaxy. The Old Ones had held by their values of all life being precious, but such was the ferocity and danger of this war that they had simply created life for the express purpose to fight. And fight they would, in titanic battles that would leave scars on the very universe. But the might of the Necrons and C'tan's armies were too great, pushing the Old Ones and their servant races to their last bastions in the galaxy. In the wake of these victories, the C'tan and their undying Necron servants now dominated the galaxy. The empire of the Old Ones was almost completely conquered. As for the rest of the galaxy, the intelligent races became cattle for the obscure hunger of the C'tan. To the younger sentient species of the galaxy, the Necrons and their star gods were cruel masters, callously harvesting populations at will just to feed the C'tan's ceaseless hunger. The C'tan were figures of terror, who through their transformation millennia ago had learned also to feed on the pain of sentient races. However, being completely focused on one's hunger for mortal life energies, the C'tan ultimately began to fight amongst themselves. Though they were of the same race, the C'tan showed no concept of brotherhood, and only worked together to aid in their desire to consume. Such was their appetite, entire sentient races from the area are completely wiped out, assisted by endless armies of hollow metallic warriors under the complete unwavering service to these colossal metallic etheric aspects of death. The cruel Satans had dominion over all. However, one in the universe was not completely theirs. Cesarek. Over the war in heaven he had been biding his time. Though the entire Necron race was under his command protocols, he could not hope to oppose the Satan at their height of power. Cesarek had doomed his entire race, and probably felt cursed as his sentience was still mostly intact. But Cesarek had long millennia to foster his hatred. He would not make the same mistakes as before, and created a plan spanning millions of years in design to free the Necrons from their enslavers. In their arrogance, the Satan did not realize the danger until it was too late. Unknown if in secret or in plain sight, the Necrons under Cesarek's controls ordered the construction of weapons powerful beyond measure. The Necrons focused their unimaginable energies of the living universe into weapons, too mighty for even the star gods to endure. Consumed by their complete desire to consume all, the Satan were ambushed and felt the full brunt of the Necrons' betrayal. Unfortunately, the Satan, through their power, had become part of the fundamental fabric of reality, and therefore almost impossible to destroy. Cesarek had likely discerned this through his grand plan, and so instead the God Killers were shattered into pieces, breaking apart their power to instead serve the Necrons. Ironically, the once all-powerful Satan were now the enslaved. They had won. The grand betrayal of Cesarek and the Necrons had been complete. However, millions of Necrons had been destroyed as a consequence of the rebellion, including all of the members of the Triarch, save the Silent King himself. Yet, even with the defeat of the Old Ones and the Satan alike, the Silent King saw the scars across the galaxy and the consequences of his actions. His people were not truly free, metallic automatons under the unwavering control of himself through the command protocols. An even greater tragedy was that although able to be reknitted through the power of the monoliths, no new Necrons could be created without biological bodies. The war in heaven had left the galaxy an interstellar wasteland, wrecked by battle and the infamous enslaver plague sweeping across entire regions of space. Any galaxy-spanning empire now would be rulers over the ashes. Cesarek likely saw that the galaxy needed to heal, in addition to avoid the reckless enslaver plague. Thus, with one last command, Cesarek ordered the entire Necron race to undergo a great sleep in stasis chambers across numerous tomb cities across the galaxy. Over time, scars fade, and so the Necrons would wait for a more opportune time to finally conquer the galaxy. For Cesaric himself, he had severed the command protocol, leaving the Necrons upon their reawakening to make their own choices once more. Likely due to his immense feelings of guilt and shame for what his decisions had cost the Necrons, Cesaric did not join the Great Sleep. Instead, he chose exile. He would spend the countless years in penance, thinking and reflecting. The Necrons had seemingly vanished. With one of the greatest forces in the galaxy gone, this left a large power vacuum, and so the galaxy was inherited unopposed by the Eldari. As the millions of years pass, the Eldari ruled with no equal, seemingly unaware of the fate of the Necrons, and eventually believing their existence to be partially myth. However, as the Necrons had foretold, all great things come to an end, and this is true even for the Eldari. Through the stagnation and depravity of the Eldari Empire, it had destroyed itself through the birth of Slaanesh. Destroying the Empire, cursing the living to be devoured upon death. The mantle of dominion would pass to another, mankind. The events of mankind have been of little consequence to the slumbering Necrons, but time inside stasis had not been so kind. By the time of the late 41st millennium, many tomb worlds had been destroyed over the eons. Natural disasters, supernovas, or accidental discovery from other sentient races. It is unclear the exact cause, but in M41, the Necrons' long sleep was coming to an end. Some of the tomb worlds of the various Necron dynasties had begun awakening. Many other tombs still slumbered, and most of those that had awoken were disorientated, damaged, in a universe unfamiliar to them. In particular, the Necron ruling dynasties had awoken with their free will back. There were those who followed the Silent King, and those who were forced through the Biotransference. When they pushed through the emulation with their pain-ridden bodies, their new forms were not what they were promised. Their subjects had only the capacity to obey, devoid of personality. Themselves inhabitants of strong necrodermis bodies, but enslaved completely to the orders of the Silent King. Many of these re-emerging dynasties viewed the Satan with much blame and contempt, happy now to have many of the shards under their command as vindication. The Satan, barely an echo of their former selves. Many others must feel animosity directly for Cesaric, for his leadership had led them to irreparable damage to the Necrontyr people, and they were enslaved to his commands for millions of years. Though he had freed them, some of the dynasties see this as a new chance for leadership, an opportunity to become the new ruling dynasty. What is clear is that the race in late M41 is currently leaderless, and it was now a race of the dynasty to dominate their rivals and to carve out their own space empires. However, despite these ongoing wars of reconquest, something had changed the plans of all the Necrons. the Silent King himself, Cesaric, had returned. After millions of years in exile, he had come to reunite the Necrons under one banner and to prepare them. A threat had come from outside of the galaxy, a devourer, set to consume all in its path. They have slumbered and let the galaxy heal, and now they have threats on all sides. Despite his mistakes and flaws, the reawakened dynasties are now come to see that it's the time for strong leadership. Now is the time for war. Thank you so much for watching. As we see, the Necrontyr, despite being Xenos, they really are people. And as we see them return to the forefront in the Indomitus era, it's nice to see that they are as complicated as we are. There's plenty more to talk about the Necrons and the Satan in particular, and I just want to say once more, thank you for watching.